Welcome to AP Environmental Science. In this video, we are going to talk a little bit about commercial fishing and how unregulated commercial fishing can lead to this phenomena called overfishing, or the depletion of the fishery as a resource. Now, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the common commercial fishing techniques, and I want you to keep in mind that when we're talking about fishing, we're not just talking about fish. So fishing involves harvesting living creatures from the ocean, so this includes crabs and sharks and lobsters and, of course, fish. Now, there are several practices that are most common, and we're going to talk about those one at a time. These include Longline, Driftnet or Gill-net, Persim, and Trawling, along with talking about how fishermen locate the fish, which is using sonar. So we'll start here with Longline. So a longline is just that, a very, very long fishing line that has hooks spaced evenly along it, and it is dragged behind the boat. Now, when I say long, I mean very, very, very long. On average, the U.S. longline rig is actually 28 miles long, which is huge. Now, these have some pros and cons. The pros are that this is very efficient. You can catch a whole lot of fish pretty quickly using this particular method. But the cons is if you can catch a whole lot of fish quickly, that means you can overfish very quickly. And that's what we want to avoid. Also, this particular method can catch a lot of non-target fish pretty easily, and it can catch birds because these hooks are not necessarily very deep under the water, and birds tend to, particularly seabirds, tend to dive into the water to catch their fish, and they can become hooked because they're going after these fish that are already hooked on these lines, and so the birds can be catched as bycatch as well. The second type would be Driftnet or Gill-net. Now, this is, again, a very long net, so several miles long, and it can be set at various depths. And this could also be pulled behind the boat, or it could be anchored in place. And what happens here is the fish are swimming along doing their normal fishy business, and they swim into this net. Now, their head can go through, but it gets caught, so their body cannot go through as well. So right around the gill line of the fish is where it gets stuck. So that's where it gets the name gill-net. Now, this has, again, pros and cons. The pros is that it's very efficient. You can catch a lot of fish very quickly. The cons is that it is going to lead to overfishing because, again, if you're catching a lot of fish quickly, that means you can overfish quickly if you're not paying close attention to what's going on. And with a drift net or a gill net, this is not species specific. So non-target species can easily become entangled in this net, and that leads to some serious issues. The next type is called a Persim, and this is very, very big, in the order of 200 meters long. And this kind of looks like a drawstring purse or drawstring bag. And it has a drawstring on the bottom and on the top. So what happens here is the boat locates a school of fish, and it drags that net to kind of circle around them. And then once you've drawn all the way around the entire school of fish, then they pull the bottom shut, pull the top shut, and then haul the entire net into the boat. Now, again, pros and cons. The pros, again, is that this is very efficient. You can catch a whole lot of fish very quickly. And this particular method is not necessarily species specific. So you can use this method for catching a variety of different types of fish of different sizes. But the cons is you are catching an entire school of fish, so an entire population all at once. And that means that whole population is getting wiped out in one fell swoop. And you can easily catch non-target species, because typically you're not going to have all of just the same kind of fish in one particular area. Now, that does happen, but it is not the most common thing to happen. The fourth type is called trawling, and this is a net that's shaped kind of like a cone that is dragged behind the boat. Now, it could be dragged through the middle of the water, or it could be dragged along the bottom. Now, things to keep in mind. If you are dragging a net across the bottom of the ocean, it's going to pick up everything along the bottom and it's going to disturb all of those fragile communities along the bottom of the ocean. And in a sense, it kind of acts like an eraser, just wiping out and destroying all of that benthic community. Now, the pros, it is very efficient. You can net and capture quite a bit of fish in one pull. But this also, again, can lead to overfishing, because anytime you have a method that can catch a lot of fish, that means you can catch too many fish. And the other major con is that it destroys those benthic or bottom communities. So how do we find fish? Well, the answer would be sonar. At least that's how most commercial fishermen find their fish. It's not just some fish tale saying, oh, there's good fishing off of this coast. It's actually a pretty sophisticated method. So with sonar, what happens is a signal is sent off the boat down towards the bottom of the water body, and that signal is going to bounce off of whatever surface it hits. And that bouncing off of that surface will return the signal back to the boat, and that has a sensor that collects this data and gives this image of what does the bottom of that water body look like, and were there any fish in the way between the boat and the bottom of the water. Now, the pros, this is a pretty efficient way to find fish. You can easily see, is there any fish here or not? And that helps the fishermen to be more targeted in their approach to where they use their various fishing method. And because we can determine, is there fish here or not, this increases profits, because you're going to spend less time at sea and you're going to use less fossil fuel just moving around in the ocean trying to find these fish. Now, the cons, because we can so easily identify where the fish are, we can accelerate overfishing, because we can see clearly the fish are here, I'm going to fish here, the fish are not over there, I'm not going to fish over there. Also, sonar does interfere with the navigation of marine mammals, because marine mammals use a similar method to communicate and to find their way around the ocean. Now, I've also talked about non-target species throughout these earlier slides here, and when I say non-target species, another term for that would be bycatch. Now, bycatch would be anything that you're not trying to catch that gets trapped in the nets. Oftentimes, this bycatch is processed along with the rest of the fish, or it's very unceremoniously tossed back into the ocean. Now, all sorts of species can become bycatch as long as they're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Overfishing is also this classic example of the tragedy of the commons. Now remember, this is something that is used by everyone, but really not regulated by anybody. And two big examples of this would be the Lake Michigan commercial fishing of whitefish and herring. This fishery collapsed due to overfishing and invasive species. The invasive species in that particular example that really were devastating to some of the larger fish populations would be the sea lamprey that made its way into Lake Michigan. And that's that top picture on here is the sea lamprey attached to a trout. The other example is the Georges Bank fishery. Now, this used to be extremely productive back in the 1960s. However, due to overfishing, it was completely depleted by 1995. And to this day, it has not bounced back nearly to what it was back in the 1960s. So the Georges Bank, that is off of the northeastern coast of the United States, off of Massachusetts and Maine. So how do we make fishing better? Well, the couple of the methods that we have seen success with is creating a maximum sustainable yield using catch limits. So oftentimes if you go fishing at your local lake or river, you will see signs that say that it's catch and release only, or it will tell you your limit of you can only have so many fish of this species and they all have to be over this size or within this size range in order to be kept. We also are able to modify our fishing techniques to reduce that bycatch, and there are several laws and treaties that help to protect these critical species. And we'll talk about these in just a moment. One of these modified fishing techniques is a turtle excluder device. And these are really cool. We see these on those trawling devices, and they're really just this little gate that allows the fish to swim through and get caught in the net, but it allows larger fish and sea turtles to get bumped up and go through the escape hatch. Now, of course, you do lose a little bit of your target species through that. However, you are not going to be catching the sea turtles, or nearly as many as you did in the past. And that has seen a lot of success in the commercial fishing industry. We also have several laws and treaties. The two that really stand out are the U.S. Endangered Species Act and CITES, so the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. And we talk about these two treaties and acts throughout the course. Both of them are really saying that if we accidentally catch an endangered species, we need to do something to return that back to its habitat. And there is also this legislation saying that we cannot purposefully go after endangered species. So both of these are really focused on protecting endangered species, and they are backed up with some type of enforcement piece and incentive to actually follow this regulation. So you could say that if your country is following this regulation, some other country is going to give you some type of incentive, and that's particularly what the more developed countries do towards the developing countries to encourage them to protect and conserve their wildlife. So in summary, again, this was a lot of information, and I think this slide here helps to sort it all out. You should be able to identify and describe commercial fishing techniques and how they can lead to overfishing. Now, keep in mind, not all fisherfolk are really out there for their own game trying to do a tragedy of the commons. Most of them are really concerned about the longevity of the fishery and wanting to be able to have that lifestyle and career be passed on to subsequent generations. You should also be able to describe some examples of the tragedy of the commons and the difference of what is your target versus your non-target species and how we can reduce that bycatch. Also, you should be able to talk about a little bit of some sustainable kit fishing techniques that result from having catch limits, some bycatch guards like the turtle excluder device, and ways that laws and treaties can help create a more sustainable fishing option. Please send me your questions here at the end. Again, I know this was a lot of information, and I hope that as you watch this video, you were able to learn something.